I remember the first time they called me Raven. It was not a name I chose, but one that was handed to me in a smoke-filled office beneath Wilhelmstrasse, when the air still smelled of victory and certainty. "You have the eyes for it," my handler said. "Black and sharp, okay? A bird that sees everything but never sings." I was 25 then, uniform pressed, heart full of misplaced pride. Berlin pulsed with confidence, banners, brass bands, and the fever of destiny. We believed history was bending for us, and I believed it too. My orders were simple: infiltrate, listen, and report. They told me I was serving the fatherland, defending civilization itself from chaos. I never questioned it, not yet. They trained us in silence, how to watch without being seen, how to break a man's resolve without raising your voice. I was good at it, too good perhaps. I could read fear in a glance, loyalty in hesitation. They said I had a gift, but I began to understand it was more of a curse, the ability to know what someone would do before they themselves did. My first assignment was in Prague, 1941. My task was to monitor resistance networks, intercept messages, and identify anyone feeding intelligence to London. I operated under false papers, drank with Czech officers, smiled when they toasted freedom, and reported every name they uttered. I watched men disappear after my reports. At night, I told myself it was duty. Okay, I avoided mirrors. Then came the promotion. I was summoned back to Berlin. They said I was needed in the heart of the intelligence directorate to coordinate networks across occupied Europe. I was flattered, terrified, and strangely numb. The city had changed by then. There was fear behind the walls, and the laughter of victory had thinned into whispers. But still, the lights burned. My office was near Tiergarten, a cold building with narrow windows and files that smelled of dust and ink. From there, I handled agents who lived and died in the shadows, some loyal, some desperate. They called me Raven over the radio, and soon, even my colleagues forgot my real name. That suited me. Real names were dangerous. Met my handler often, a man named Kruger. He had the calm cruelty of someone who believed in nothing. "Emotions," he said once, "are a liability. Remember that, Raven?" I tried. Then I met Elise. She worked in the cipher office, quiet, precise, her fingers stained with ink. We were forbidden to speak beyond necessity, but there was something in her gaze, a softness that defied the world we lived in. One evening, when the bombs fell, we took shelter together in the basement. The walls shook, and I could smell the dust and smoke. She laughed nervously. "Berlin is crumbling," she whispered. "Maybe it's trying to bury its own sins." That night changed everything. I began to write her name in the margins of reports, a dangerous act of sentiment. I started doubting the messages I sent, hesitating to condemn names I wasn't sure of. The first time I altered a report, I felt my pulse roar in my ears. I told myself it was mercy. But in our world, mercy was treason. By 1943, the war had turned. The air raids came nightly, and the city was becoming a skeleton of smoke and concrete. People still saluted, but fewer believed. I carried on my work, pretending to serve, but the walls were closing in. Kruger noticed my hesitation. "You've grown soft, Raven," he told me, eyes cold. "Don't forget, we are the eyes of the Reich, and eyes that blink are useless." But it was too late. I had already begun to see too much. Elise and I learned to speak in glances. In a building full of watchers, even silence had to be coded. We met in corridors, exchanging fragments of truth hidden beneath official lies. She was clever, careful, too careful sometimes, but I could see the same sickness growing in her that had begun to take root in me. Doubt. It was early 1944 when I first disobeyed a direct order. A resistance courier had been captured near Dresden, and my superior demanded his network be traced and purged. The man's name was Karol Novak. I remembered him from my Prague days. He once poured me a glass of wine and told me that all tyrannies eventually devoured their own. He'd been right. When the file came to me, I hesitated. Instead of forwarding his captured message to Kruger, I destroyed it. A single act, one sheet of paper, one name erased, but it was enough. It felt as though I had crossed a line invisible to everyone but me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The city outside was burning, searchlights stabbing through the smoke, sirens wailing like lost souls, and I realized Berlin was a cage, and we were the birds trained to sing for our captors. Weeks later, Elise disappeared for 3 days. No one spoke of it, but I saw her empty chair in the cipher office, the cup of cold tea still waiting beside her typewriter. When she returned, she was thinner, pale, and she wouldn't look at me. Only later did I learn she had been interrogated by the Gestapo. Someone had accused her of leaking coded material. She was released for lack of proof, but something in her eyes had changed. "I won't survive another questioning," she whispered one night after curfew when we met near the ruins of the old station. "They know too much already." I wanted to protect her, but how could a man like me protect anyone? I was a shadow bound to orders I no longer believed in. Still, I made a decision. I would help her escape Berlin. There was a network, small, hidden even from our own intelligence ranks, smuggling people out of the city through the southern rail lines. It was a web of old officers, priests, and quiet citizens who'd seen too much. I had dossiers on them. It's been meant to dismantle their operation. Instead, I reached out to one of their couriers, a man named Vogel. He was cautious, thin as a ghost, and looked at me like one who expected betrayal. "Why should we trust you?" he asked. "Because I have betrayed worse men," I said. It was true enough. Through Vogel, I learned the price of freedom. False papers, safe routes, names that had to be erased from the city's ledgers. Everything was dangerous, everything paid for in silence. Elise and I began planning her escape in whispers, the kind that could have condemned us both. But Kruger grew suspicious. He had that instinct, a predator's intuition. One evening, he called me into his office. "You've been sloppy, Raven," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Your reports lack conviction. Perhaps your sympathies are ... elsewhere." He let the words hang in the air like a noose. I said nothing. He smiled faintly, as if he enjoyed watching me squirm. Berlin is full of traitors these days. Even the clever ones forget that I always find them. When I left his office, my hands were trembling. Elise had to leave within days. The city was no longer safe for either of us. On April 15th, 1944, I walked her to the old freight yard, disguised as a clerk. The night was silent, but for the hum of distant bombers. We said almost nothing. I remember her face in the dim light, the tears she refused to shed. "If we survive this," she said softly, "promise me you'll leave too." I wanted to promise, but I couldn't. Men like me didn't escape. We haunted the ruins we built. She boarded the train, a shadow among refugees. I waited, until the last car vanished into the night, then turned back toward the city. That was the last time I saw her. The next morning, Kruger summoned me again. Vogel was found dead, he said, shot while crossing the southern checkpoint. Strange, isn't it, Raven? How your name appeared in his pocket. I said nothing. He leaned forward, his eyes sharp and amused. You've disappointed me, but perhaps I can still use you one last assignment before we decide what to do with you. That was the beginning of my end. Kruger's last assignment came sealed in a gray envelope marked urgent, eyes only. Inside were photographs, names, and a simple directive: locate and eliminate internal defectors operating under Allied instruction within Berlin. It was, in essence, a witch hunt, a purge of the few remaining fragments of conscience left in the city. I stared at the faces in the file for a long time. Some were men I've known for years, cryptographers, officers, even a doctor from the hospital near Alexanderplatz. I had shared cigarettes with them, traded rumors, once even toasted with one at a funeral. Now, they were targets. It was clear. Kruger knew I had betrayed him, and this was his way of confirming it. He wanted to see whether I would follow orders or whether I'd make my final mistake. The first person on the list was arrested within hours. The second vanished before I could reach him. The third, a radio technician named Bauer, found me first. I was walking home through the ruins of Potsdamer Platz when he stepped out of the shadows, his coat torn, his face gaunt. You shouldn't be here, Raven, he whispered. They've turned on their own. Kruger's men are everywhere. I know, I said. He looked at me with weary pity. Then why are you still playing their game? I didn't have an answer. He handed me a scrap of paper, coordinates, I realized, to a hidden radio post used by the resistance to contact the Allies. They know about Elise, he said, quietly. She didn't make it out. Her train was stopped before Dresden. Someone betrayed the route. I felt the world tilt. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Bauer was still speaking, but I couldn't hear him. Elise, gone. The last fragile piece of hope I had clung to, erased by the very machine I had served. When I returned to headquarters, Kruger was waiting. You look pale, Raven, he said smoothly. Bad news. I could have shot him then. I even reached for my pistol, but he only smiled, as though he wanted me to try. Do you know what separates men like us from the fools outside? He asked. We understand that loyalty is not about belief, it's about necessity. I walked out without replying. That night, I went to the coordinates Bauer had given me, a basement beneath a ruined bookstore. Inside were 3 people, a nurse, a mechanic, and a young boy no older than 16, manning the radio. They looked at me with fear, expecting arrest. Instead, I said, "Get out, they're coming." They hesitated. The boy asked, "Who are you?" "No one," I said. "Just a ghost doing one last decent thing." I stayed behind long enough to destroy the radio. When Kruger's men arrived at dawn, all they found was rubble and static. The next days blurred together. The Allies were closing in. The city was a corpse. Streets littered with burned out tanks, buildings split open like bones. I saw people hanging from lampposts with signs around their necks. Traitor, coward, defeatist. The air smelled of smoke and ash and endings. Kruger's office was abandoned, the files gone. I found only a note on his desk, written in his precise handwriting. We all choose our prisons, Raven. Some of us die in them. I don't know if he fled or if he met the justice he had escaped for so long. Only knew that my time was over. I spent the last weeks of the war hiding among the ruins, using false papers, pretending to be a clerk or a refugee, depending on who asked. I scavenged food, listened to the distant thunder of artillery drawing closer each night. The Soviets were near. You could feel it in the ground itself, trembling with the weight of their advance. One morning, I saw a child standing in the street holding a white handkerchief tied to a stick. His mother was gone. He waved it toward the sky as the tanks rolled in. That was the moment I realized the war was finished, not when Berlin fell, but when even children had learned to surrender. When the Red Army entered, I burned what was left of my identification, my uniform, and the documents that carried the name Ravan. But names, I learned, are like ghosts. They don't burn easily. The war ended with silence, okay? Not the silence of peace that would have been mercy, but the heavy, unnatural quiet that settles after the screaming stops. Berlin was a grave, and I was one of the ghosts left wandering it. The Soviets were everywhere. Their banners hung from the ruins of government buildings. Their soldiers prowled the streets with the suspicion of men who had seen too much horror to trust anyone. I blended among the crowds of refugees, my uniform long gone, my insignia buried beneath a floorboard. For weeks, I lived in cellars and bombed out apartments, trading what little I had for food. Every night, the city whispered of revenge, of informants dragged from hiding, of women disappearing, of the reckoning that had come at last. I told myself that I deserved whatever fate awaited me, yet somehow I kept surviving. One day in May 1945, I was rounded up with a group of civilians near the Tiergarten. A Soviet officer questioned us through an interpreter. Name, occupation, place of service. When my turn came, I said I had been a postal clerk. My voice didn't tremble, though my heart did. He studied me for a long time. "You speak Russian?" "Enough," I said. He nodded. "Then you will work for us." Translating, and so the man called Ravan vanished into another name. For months, I translated interrogation files for the very people who would have executed me had they known the truth. I read testimonies from men I had once commanded, reports on networks I had built. It was as if I were watching my own life disassembled, piece by piece. Sometimes I wondered if Kruger's words had been prophetic. We all choose our prisons. Mine was made of paper and ink now, and every translation was a confession written in someone else's name. In late 1946, I managed to slip away. Berlin was divided by thin zones, checkpoints, and lines drawn through the rubble. I crossed into the western sector using forged documents and the chaos of a market crowd. From there, I drifted Hamburg, Munich, then finally Geneva under a false passport. Switzerland was quiet, clean, unbearable, so I found work cataloging books for a small library, and for a time I almost convinced myself I was free. Each night, when I locked the door and turned off the lights, I could feel Berlin breathing behind me. I would see Elise's face in my dreams, hear the crackle of radio static, the sound of boots on stone corridors. People say memory fades, but that is a lie. Memory changes shape. It becomes quieter, heavier, more precise. Every name I erased, every report I altered, every man I condemned in silence, they all return when the nights are long. I have learned that guilt is not something you carry. It is something that carries you. In 1951, I received a letter with no return address. Aside was a single photograph, a woman in a Red Cross uniform standing somewhere in the ruins of Dresden. On the back, a single word was written, alive. The handwriting was hers. I never knew how she found me or why she bothered. Perhaps she wanted me to know that Mercy had not died completely, that at least one of us had escaped. I never answered. What could I have said? That the man she once knew had long since vanished beneath layers of deceit. That I was still waiting for a war that refused to end. Years passed, the world rebuilt itself, pretending to forget. Berlin rose again, glass replacing stone, lights replacing fire. But beneath it all, I know the old city still sleeps. The tunnels, the offices, the whispers. Sometimes I dream I am walking those corridors again, hearing Kruger's voice echo off the walls. Eyes that blink are useless. I am an old man now. My hands shake when I write. Yet I write all this because the truth demands witnesses, even if they come too late. Perhaps someone will read these pages and understand that loyalty is never pure, that patriotism can be another form of blindness. If you ask who I was, I will tell you. Once, I was called Raven. I believed I was serving something greater than myself. I was wrong. What I served was fear. The war ended, yes, but not for me. I walked the streets of every city as if they are still Berlin, as if every stranger's eyes might know my secret. I tell myself that one day I will stop hearing the sirens in my dreams, that I will no longer turn at the sound of a typewriter. But I know better. Some ghosts never leave the ruins. Some names, once spoken, never die. My code name was Raven, and I never truly escaped Berlin.